So last time we discussed Capcom's flagship beat-em-up, and a hidden gem of a predecessor that had a lot of interesting design elements that we'll see iterated upon in further games. However, there were a lot of games released that weren't beat-em-ups between 89 and 91. Games like Strider and Super Ghosts and Ghouls were hitting consoles, and Capcom's arcade side was working on perfectly crafting Street Fighter II, which launched in February of 91, but had been in development nearly 2 years earlier right after the release of Final Fight. Final Fight was even supposedly an early touchstone for the design of Street Fighter II. According to interviews with Akira's Nishitani and Yasuda, Capcom gave them the chance to prove themselves with Final Fight, and that paid off really well, landing them both spots on the dev team for the sequel that really started it all. Meanwhile, Capcom released the dungeon-crawling hack-and-slash Magic Sword in 1990. The game was barely not a beat-em-up enough for me to play it all the way through, almost feeling like a side-scrolling version of some dungeon crawler like Gauntlet. You're scaling the big evil tower, rescuing people in your party, but it shows once again Capcom's love for leveling systems in their arcade action games at the time. I feel almost guilty for not including this in my retrospective, but I keep telling myself that if I include this, I'd have to include a lot of other platformer action games like Strider or Trojan that don't really feel like beat-em-ups to me. However, it does show a through line of Capcom's devs wanting to add more sophisticated systems into these sort of action games. We see a return of rudimentary leveling and upgrade systems in The King of Dragons, where you have a multi-class party of adventurers who level up, find new weapons and armor in the chests and spoils of war. It's got this anime high fantasy charm that feels like it hit peak saturation in the late 80s and early 90s. The Record of Lodoss War franchise had been gaining popularity from its humble beginnings as a serialization of some writers' D&D transcripts. However, Yutaka Izubichi's designs for the series had come to heavily define a lot of what Japanese high fantasy looked like. It's a huge inspiration on the visual style of this sort of media in Japan, and King of Dragons is not the last place we'll see it from Capcom. There are 4 classes that the player gets to choose from in King of Dragons, those being the Elf, the Wizard, the Fighter, the Cleric, and the Dwarf. Taking a cue from 1st edition D&D, the Elf and the Dwarf do not get to have their own class. They are simply Elf and Dwarf. Each class hits a little differently and moves at different speeds. I spent a lot of time playing as the Cleric, as having a big boy with big shield just feels good in this game. Characters with shields can actually block incoming attacks by pressing the opposite direction on the stick. Every character also has a magic semi-screen clearing attack, or a desperation attack as they're called sometimes, but some classes have stronger magic abilities than others. It's a really solid, if straightforward, hack and slash game. There's this cute little world map that shows you your progress and just how far you've come. It's really more cute than it looks on the surface. There's a few NPCs who usually just connect the end of one level to the beginning of the next. There's this funky, wise old tree, a Family Guy death pose fella who I like to assume fell out of the Hydra's neck. It's all really silly high fantasy vibes. We've got skeleton warriors and fishmen, a whole bestiary ripped from the same places that Castlevania took theirs. All in all, it's got this really cartoony sheen that really fits an action game like this. Often by the end of the stage, you'll find an upgrade to your weapon or armor. These feel really minute at first, but by the end of the game, you've seen your character level up and gear up with cooler and stronger spells and weapons. These are some of the ultimate style over substance games, and that's not really supposed to be an insult. Maybe it's just a testament to how they managed to crank these games out back then, but they're little morsels, like I said before. Something back in the day you would throw all your quarters at just to see a new stage, and today you can sit down and have a complete product that packs a depth of enjoyment into a small package. Embarking on this retrospective has felt like reading a collection of short stories from similar authors. Arcade games become bite-sized action set-piece games when taking the constraint of credits away from our analysis of them, but they are an inherent part of the design of these games. I played all 3 of these games in a single day, single session, back to back, and that's how I plan on doing the later batches as well. But I have to remember that that's not the condition of play that these games were designed for. Maybe that's why there's not a lot of footage of me actually blocking in my self-recording. The glossy, cartoonish charm of The King of Dragons is shared with the next beat-em-up to come out the same year, Captain Commando. Captain Commando was originally conceived at Capcom USA as a mascot who would appear on the back of game cases to congratulate the player in choosing Capcom. The game's director, Junichi Ono, had this to say regarding how a regional mascot got his own game. Quote, "We were looking around for some good source material for what was to be Capcom's first 4-player game, and we found Captain Commando. However, his image was that of a contemporary astronaut, and since it didn't seem like that kind of character could survive in a beat-em-up game, we changed him into some sort of, quote, ultimate astronaut, unquote, character, unquote." Ono and his team also created 3 new fighters, the alien knife wielder Mac, called Janetti in Japan, the ninja Ginzu, named Sho in Japan, and a baby in a mech named Babyhead, which was named Hoover in Japan. It's interesting how these all sort of map onto the Final Fight character archetypes. Captain Commando is your all-rounder Cody, you've got the baby mech, which rips moves off wholesale from Mike Hagar, and both the ninja and Mac have qualities of Guy from Final Fight. Increased movement, fairly strong jump attacks. It's no coincidence that this feels like Final Fight, considering Akira Yasuda worked on both games as a planner, as well as the fact that it's set in the near future of 2036 in Final Fight's own Metro City. It's almost ironic, though, that the Japanese redesign does more to capture the silliness and over-the-top nature of American comic book characters than the original Games in America were marketed much more with this sheen of futurism and space-age aesthetics that didn't always match up to the tone of the game being advertised. Captain Commando was this marketing trend boiled down into a mascot for Capcom, and that's why all these old drawings of him have this stereotypical ray gun Buck Rogers look to them. Captain Commando, the game, sort of forgets any of that was part of the character and throws you right into this comic book world full of aliens and robots. It definitely feels like something I'd read from Mirage or Image Comics at the time. I think Capcom didn't necessarily have the best beat-em-ups, but they always gave the best presentation. Music, graphics, character designs, that visual design up approach we touched upon in the last video is very apparent. Captain Commando is incredibly stylish. For example, instead of scrolling on to the next stage, sometimes you do this cheeky little star transition. Even the way the little voice sample unenthusiastically says, "Captain Commando."
Captain Commando.
There's so many little charming things about this game. The Final Fight-esque progress map, showing more and more absurd locations as you go along, is a good way to express the core of Captain Commando. The first enemies you see are even crouched down smoking cigarettes before they notice you. It's these little silly things that add a lot of the character to the game. It's really a shame Captain Commando didn't see more action. Of course, he did have a spot on the rosters of a few fighting games, but I would have loved to see how Capcom would treat the character during the peak of Clover and the company's character action renaissance. Would it become even more stylized, akin to something like Beautiful Joe, or become something else entirely? The original concept for God Hand came from Shinji Mikami's frustrations with an American Final Fight sequel that we might talk about in a later video. Would a Captain Commando reboot at this point turn into something else entirely, the way so many things for Capcom have? There's no telling, but it's fun to imagine. At least he made it into Marvel. Getting back to a beat-em-up with decent combos is nice after Knights of the Round, which didn't really have combos. Captain Commando is straightforward belt-scrolling action, though. The most obvious advancement since Final Fight is double the amount of playable characters on screen. The characters also have a double-tap dash and multiple jumping moves. There are also new pickups such as laser guns, missile launchers, and shuriken that are only usable by Ginza. It really feels like Capcom is taking in what companies like Konami were doing with 4-player beat-em-ups like Ninja Turtles at the time. 91 was a huge year for the genre, with TMNT and the Simpsons arcade game coming right behind Street Fighter II and Final Fight for the most successful arcade games of the year stateside. The Super Nintendo and Genesis were finally starting to be able to recreate relatively faithful ports of arcade titles. Beat-em-ups were at their peak. I suppose that's why Capcom felt comfortable releasing 3 different titles back to back at the end of that year. All three of the games covered today outsold Street Fighter II for at least a month, according to Japanese gaming publication Game Machine. Capcom had gotten themselves the cash cow they always wanted in Street Fighter II, and they had a big team who were probably itching to work on their own projects afterwards. One of these games was Knights of the Round. If King of Dragons was going for an anime high fantasy style, Knights of the Round takes a page from Captain Commando and feels more like something ripped from the pages of Image Comics. There's not a lot out there about the development of this game that I could find, with most of the planners not having any listing on Moby Games. There is an interview with Noritaka Funamizu where he talks about wishing he included more utility with the horses in Dynasty Wars, such as a dedicated horse attack button. Funamizu worked as a level designer on Knights of the Round, and in this interview he remarks that the office playtesters started referring to the horse attack in Knights of the Round as the Horse Crush, before that ever became the official name of the move. Horses are surprisingly prominent in the game, with the player being able to knock opponents off their horse or summon one with a statue found in treasure chests. Dashing forward while riding one will cause the horse to jump forward and trample enemies with its Horse Crush. Knights of the Round plays with a lot of the same tropes and mechanics as King of Dragons does. It's a straightforward beat-em-up, but there's a leveling system and blocking mechanics. However, the span of classes in King of Dragons makes leveling not only more interesting, but less of a passive mechanic. When you choose which party member you want to play as, you're not only making that decision, but also the decision to level them faster than everyone else. My cleric hit double digits before anyone else in my party did. Knights of the Round uses its leveling system a lot more bluntly. Here it becomes more about trying to get as many points within a level as possible, destroy every obstacle in your way for the gold that's inside, split those big piles of gold open into smaller ones when you hit them, and increase your point payout. It's an incentive to the player to destroy these environmental features and to lead the player into the designer's ideal cycle of actions. Knights of the Round is a lot of fun. You got 3 characters ranging from light but weak to strong but slow, and your all-rounder in the middle. Standard stuff by now. It's an interesting comparison with King of Dragons, both fantasy beat-em-ups with leveling systems that have different approaches to similar design challenges. I think King of Dragons has the stronger character and enemy design, but Knights of the Round really excels at its backgrounds and stage layouts. The large, sprawling backgrounds do a lot with perspective and space, and even though it's kind of hard to focus on when playing the game, it's most evident when I'm editing the damn video, and I've already written and read the whole script. Really, I've been having to make myself go back and rewatch my old footage just to have better things to say about the backgrounds. These are games that may be bite-sized, turn your brain off button bashers, but they certainly command a lot more attention than one might think. I really like the range of enemies in Knights of the Round. There's this boss who has like this big huge Dark Souls hammer and big faces on his armor. You fight a samurai in this big field with the moon peeking over the field and the horizon. King of Dragons has a lot more bland levels in comparison. There's the boat and the tower at the end, but most of them are just castles and caves. Knights of the Round has a fair, a bustling village. Hell, even the castle levels feel more like storming a keep than just fighting some creatures in a stone room. My point in these comparisons is not that one game is better than the other, but just that there are many ways that Capcom approached the same type of game. Captain Commando took the groundwork laid by Final Fight and iterated, just as Dynasty Wars and Magic Sword laid the groundwork for more and more RPG and adventure elements in these action games. We'll see Capcom iterate upon a lot of these mechanics, even stuff established in games covered today in the coming titles. We still have a lot of games to go, and next time we're covering Capcom's comic book adaptations with Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Warriors of Fate, and Marvel's Punisher.